Without further ado, I introduce to you David Hankerson, Cobb County Manager.
Good morning. I tell you, it was noted I've been speaking, but anytime I look out at the crowd and I don't know many people, I get a little nervous. I asked Ross that if I choke up, he need to come up and back me up, and he refused. And I asked Dave Wills, and he refused. So I guess I'm gonna go for it. But again, good morning. It is good to be here, but also with that introduction that Ms. Meadows gave me, I often wonder if I can live up to such introduction, and I always want the introduction to say, here it is, he's David Hankerson, and let's go for it. So again, good morning. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you, and certainly I've got a lot to say in a short order of time. I've been known to want to talk a lot, but we're going to try to add some substance to it this morning and to go from there. This is showing you the counties in the state where we have at least one elected commissioner, and that's quite a few, and you're that representative. And now that I've said to a couple of commissioners, now you've got this job, you've got the tiger by the tail, and I always think of a quote by Harry S. Truman, the buck stops here, and it's going to stop with you. Men make history and not the other way around. In periods where there's no leadership, society stands still. Progress occurs when courageous, skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better. Harry S. Truman. And I think that's going to be applicable to you and what you've got and how you move through doing your job. Governing authority. Your primary role is governing. And hopefully you take that and it's implied that you do it with integrity in all. And the authority, don't abuse it. It's implied that you do it with dignity and grace and integrity. And the two together, government authority equals the Board of Commissioners. Those two terms are superfluous, and I think y'all are ready for the task, and then you're going to be ready to move on. Your role in government is determined by the form of government. There are various forms of government, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And these are the various forms of government throughout the state. You see the consolidated government, administrator, manager form of government, traditional CEO, elected office, sole commissioner, full-time chairman. The big difference in many of your mind between a manager and an administrator, in many cases, they are the same. But a county manager generally has the authority to hire and fire, especially fire employees. It's not unusual for an administrator not to have that authority to fire. It depends on the authority that's given that position by the Board of Commissioners. As you get into, you see we only have one CEO form of government in the state, and it doesn't mean that those governments, whether it's a sole commissioner or other, does not have a chief operating officer or someone that assists with various titles, but typically they have someone to assist them. Traditional form of government typically don't have any hired professional staff, and a lot of times the staff is groomed, is managed by that chairman and or the Board of Commissioners. So your authority, I would suggest to you that you as a commissioner get to know what your authority is, and if you don't know that authority and how you plan to operate, I would suggest you as a board at a retreat try to define how you want to operate. And I would also suggest that you try to work on those things while you can communicate. Sometimes when you can't communicate, you can't come back and set no rules to operate under. So I would strongly suggest that, and even define in your mind. I remember when I was first appointed a county manager in 1993, I had a chairman at the time. He thought he was going to run everything his way. And it was a little tension around there for a long time. So finally we tried to have a retreat, and we finally got him to go on a retreat. I did. And the first order of business was to determine the role of the chairman, even though we had a form of government, and then determine the role of each district commissioner, and the county manager. And we had the chair start out to define the role as he saw it, as chairman. Then we had each district commissioner define the chairman's role as they saw it. Then we had the chairman define the role of each district commissioner, he saw it, and vice versa. And then we did the same thing with the county manager. It was one of the most tense meetings I've ever been in my life. But I can tell you at the end of that long day, when we left that meeting, we pretty well was on course, and it was beginning of a new beginning. But we had to have that conversation, and I think it was real good to be able to do that. These are the ones I talked about. One of the things is as commissioners that you're going to have to deal with, and your primary thing is going to be the budget. And it's going to reveal everything. It's going to determine your course and how you set your budget. As many of you know, in watching your county, taxes is something that the public keep a lot of eyes on. They appreciate it when you lower it. They still watch it. And some of them don't appreciate it unless they demand it, that you increase it. So always remember that what you do and your focus need to be on the services you provide. You have some services that are mandated. You have some that's essential as you and your community see them. And you have some services that your community desire. And I think your primary purpose need to be in your budget and on your mandated services or your essential services. And then those desired services, if you opt to afford them to do it, or you have fund balance, you can look at those type of services as you look at those. But if you can provide all those services and keep your taxes low, then you're in good shape. Because I tell you, when you have to make decisions that you need to cut the budget because your revenue is not coming in. And I would also caution you to select your desired service very carefully. Because once you start a service, sometimes someone out there, they ask for it, they're not going to want you to cut it. And I'll tell you, when we start putting our services in a budget a few years ago, we had some challenges. It was tough. Staff had no problem in recommending certain services. The Board of Commissioners didn't have the political will to do some things. For instance, we in our county put libraries in one of those desired services. Now, you can't imagine a county without a good library system. But when we put it on the table, some of the Board of Commissioners, they were fine. But we had too many. We were not shutting the system down. All of a sudden, in every one of our libraries, we have a computer center where people can come in and apply for jobs and do things on the computer. What they didn't know, they were getting from 3,000 to 5,000 emails, and many of them was probably coming off the county computers and chain emails. Well, when they got those emails, the board didn't have the political will to even shut down one library. And we also had an oversight committee that recommended libraries, and they backed up. We also had some senior centers. When those seniors packed the commission meeting, they changed their mind. And when you're looking at a 15 to 20, 25, $30 million shortfall, you can't make decisions at $1,000 a whack or $300,000. So then we decided to close a couple of service centers down. There's only $348,000 at the end of the day. They didn't have the political will to do that. So, and then the county manager and others was beaten up for making such a dumb recommendation and going to that. But you know, when the board vote and we as staff, we have to, as I tell people, once you vote, it's my idea, and I take it and run as if it was mine. So so be it. The other thing that you're governed by local ordinances. And when you establish those ordinances, they set the rules and the guidelines, and they go from there as it relate and all. And most of you have codified ordinances so that you would do that. Some of you do things by resolution, and they can guide your direction, but they're not as binding as an ordinance, and you can unwind it in a commission meeting without going back in a public hearing. But it can guide your operation and how you go through your day on a day-to-day basis. And they can be honorific in nature. Georgia law requires that you have a balanced budget. Georgia law also, you must be audited. we tend to, as local governments, once we set our budget, we tend to focus on expenses. I would suggest to you that you focus on revenue and expenses simultaneously, because when you make those projections and they don't come in on revenue, you got a problem. And if you wait till those last few months in the year to try to make decisions, those decisions become tougher. And as I always say, and you have to make those tough decisions, as Ronald Reagan would say, no answers are simple and no answers are easy. And I'll tell you, that becomes more apparent if you wait till the last minute, have to make decisions when you've got to get real cost to deal with that. I would suggest to you, and I'll talk about it again. I talked about desired services and some other things earlier. When you have that fund balance, you may be able to use it. I would always suggest that you use fund balance. That's one-time monies in my book. And you use it for non-reoccurring costs, unless you got another plan for revenue to replace it. If you use one-time money to balance your budget, if that budget includes reoccurring costs and there's nothing there for it, you headed for failure. So always stay in touch with that as well. So you need to manage that reoccurring, non-recurring costs. I would also say to you, in many of your counties, and depending on your county and the size of it, the more you can diversify your revenues, better off you're going to be. Non-tax revenues. For instance, my budget is about 55% taxes and 45% other resources. Now, many of you may not have that. Some of you may be in 80 to 90% in taxes or higher. So all I say is know what your resources, diversify if you can and can't, you've got to know. Also on your collection rate, on your revenue. A lot of people don't think about your collection rate. One year you may collect 90, 95 or 99% this year. The next year you may, at the close of your tax year, may be at 94 or 95, and you got to know what that percent fluctuation and plan for it. You'll get it, but it depends on when it comes in at the end of that year as well. So make sure you pay a lot of attention on that. That's where so many governments get in trouble, is dealing with those type things. Public service. I know all of you going to serve honorably, and most commissioners do serve honorably. We have some recent examples where that's not been the case. You were elected by the people to do people's business, not your business. Keep that in focus. The public is watching. Commit yourself to public service with integrity and honesty, and serve honorably. If you want to be known for nothing else, you want to be able for someone to say you served in your role with distinction. Because I tell you, with all the media now and social media, we are watched every day. And so you have a record there. One of the things that will help guide you and throughout in doing your job, the Commissioner's Handbook. You should have it on your reference shelf. It has a lot of detail. Will answer a lot of your questions. That's a resource in dealing with budget or setting policy, managing county property. You can take that book and you can also develop some of your own policies. You have templates. The association can help you go through other counties. They're a resource far beyond this handbook. And I'm going to talk about the association. They have resources with partners they know in other counties, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. They know exactly what's going on in most counties, what kind of ordinances and things that they have done. So don't reinvent the wheel. Whether it's a big county or small county, you can take those ordinances or those policies and you can actually develop your own to fit your needs. So always remember, we can get into this and spend a full day, and I'm sure you're going to be covered that in another session. But the big picture, the picture is much bigger. And so I The only thing I want to say about this is this should be on your reference shelf. And anytime you have some questions, go to that handbook and see what's there. If it's not there, ask, because there's a lot of things out there that can assist you and others. Learn about your government. I know many of you got ideas of changes you want to make. Many of you may have run on that platform of the changes you made, and it had good sound bites to it. But I will say to you, to be a public servant, you must understand your government. You need to understand what is it you're changing. It doesn't hurt to ask why was that put there in the first place, and what went into the thought process if someone is around or something in the record, because you may be going in a full circle. I've been around now long enough in Cobb, I've seen things go full circle. I think 20 years ago, Ms. Nash, they're doing the same thing and asking the same questions and want to write the same policies. I've just been long enough to see it. So make sure before you advocate change, you understand it and you fully understand what you're changing. Then, if appropriate, advocate to change. Now, I'm not saying change is not bad. I love to change. I love to reorganize. Because as you get challenged, there's nothing wrong with change if you understand it. There's nothing wrong with reorganizing, depending on the level of service, what type of services you want to provide, and how efficient you can provide those services. Just understand it and make sure that everyone understands what you're working on. Transparency. Open meetings. All your meetings are open with few exceptions, and I will say to you, understand those exceptions. The public has a right to know what you as a board is doing. I know a lot of them apply common sense. I'm not so sure in the revisions and even to the Open Records Act. In the minds of many, there may not be any common sense in there, as you and I understand it, but it's the law. And know that law before you break it. And then all of your documents, with few exceptions, and there are some exceptions, are subject to open records. Emails, subject to open records. Even your personal emails your business emails on your personal phone. And they go permanent. So I tell you, more and more I learn about the open records, I miss my beeper. I didn't realize many people remember that old beeper, Ross. But always remember, just because you delete them, they're not deleted. And also, if you were the originator of an email and you delivered and you sent it to someone else and they responded, that is another originator. And you deleted yours, you didn't turn them over in open record, but the one you sent it to or you copied to did. Just think how that make you look. You can overload your server. You're going to have to put them in folders. But it's sure making me think about emails. I'm not a lot of times I say, okay, yes, if I can. So there's not a lot interpreted. But you got to have that in your deliberations, your documents, and got to make sure that you deal with that because it's always open. And if you go to lunch with several commissioners and others talk county business, know the law before you get in it, because somebody's going to watch you and report you to the media. So there are some exceptions, but know those exceptions as well. Certainly is communicating, I talked about with your colleagues. Communication is key, as I made in my opening comments with your fellow commissioners. Communication is key with your staff. If you can't communicate, your organization is going to falter a little bit. You pretty well know, you need to know what each other's thinking, what you're doing. Don't assume you know what each other's thinking or they know what you're thinking. If you want your manager to keep you informed, in the county manager form of government and many others, I'm required to keep my full board informed and equally as informed. Not one more so than another. because you are all representing the citizens and the constituents, and we need to make sure you need to keep your staff informed so they know what you're thinking and what you're trying to. Staff will help you do what you're trying to do, and most time it's professional staff and staff that's been with you in that kind of long time. They can make your challenge a lot easier by letting them assist you and to do that. And please let your staff know you appreciate them and thank them. And with these tough economic times, a simple thank you, I appreciate you, means so much to staff right now. And communicate with the media when appropriate. I know some of you have good relationship with media and they never say anything negative about your county, and then some of us say we can't do anything right. But they're still the media and they're there to keep the public informed. So communicate with them. Communicate with your constituents. And there are many ways you can communicate with your constituents. You can do group emails. You can go to associations. You can do one-on-one. You can do group meetings. You can do town hall meetings. There's so many ways that you can set up a website just to communicate your constituents a link. Each of my commissioners, which is keeping us busy right now, every Friday they have an update page. And that's in every district. And it's live road closures, anything they want the public to know, from detours to everything is on that site, and they go from there. But make sure, some of you have town hall meetings or plan to have town hall meetings. Only thing I ask you to do with town hall meetings is make sure you consider your staff. For instance, I have commissioners sometimes they want to have them one a month, once every 2 months, or once a quarter. I've got 5 commissioners, and if they each have town hall meeting once a quarter, that's 20 a year. And if staff is there and going all of them aside from all the other community meetings and things they do, and I tell you, it's a good place to showcase your staff and to keep the public informed, because most of you and all of you have staff that's highly qualified and ready and aimed to do the job, and there to make you look good and certainly to make the county look good. So communicate with your public and communicate with your staff, and at utmost, communicate with each other. Because if you can't communicate and there's turmoil among the commissioners, it creates some divisiveness among staff because they get nervous and don't want to be caught in the middle. I have seen commissioners, instead of communicating with each other, they communicate through staff to you. And that puts staff in a very uncomfortable situation. I've seen them in commission meetings where instead of talking to each other, they talking through me to the other one, asking you questions instead of asking that commission. That's a bad situation to put staff in. And I would ask that you not do that. I in my county, which a lot of people may not do this, but I as county manager, and it's pretty well known, that if you as a commissioner start dressing my staff down in public, I will get out of my seat and replace that staff person at the podium and put them in a direct order to shut up. And then to get back to staff, then they're going to have to terminate me to get to staff again. I've not had to do that, but my full board knows that we don't beat up on staff in public. You want to talk to staff professionally, talk to each other professionally. It has become a culture among our commissioners, respect for each other. We put that in an informal policy, and it's been respected for the last 10 plus years. We don't allow the public to even attack the commissioners. Now, I don't know how we can stop it, but so far we've been able to control it. And one way we control it, we have 2 police officers in every commission meeting. And they've been known to escort you out the door. Trust. Trust doesn't mean you must agree. Trust means that you can accept what is said as to be truth, and what you say can be interpreted as truth. Trust builds good relationships. Lack of trust generate a lot of work on staff, a lot of questions being asked, that if you can trust each other, when they say you are off and running with it. That is the ideal way to be. You want that trustworthiness in your relationship. Doesn't mean you have to like each other, but respect each other and work together as a team for the good of the county. And that's what's so important in building those relationships. Build a relationship with constitutional officers. They are not your employees. You do not control their employees, even though you may pay their salary. Your role as commissioners is to provide them with a budget and sufficient resources to carry out their constitutional duty. And that's a decision you have to make along with that constitutional officer. This is where I often say to so many people, in my opinion, it's much easier to manage a city than it is a county. Cities don't have to deal with constitutional officers except the council itself. The Board of Commissioners have to deal with all other constitutional officers as it relates to their budgets, certainly on those county portions where the law requires it. But this is a good way to build a relationship, and that's the best advice I can give you, is build a good working relationship with those constitutional officers so you can talk about budgets, you can talk about things such as if they're staff. I've been very blessed in so many ways, and I forgive me if I say I've been blessed, because I can speak firsthand about it in my county so far. I sit down with elected officials, and the way they do their budget is just as the way I do my DOT budget. And it took some years to get there, but we're there. So we sit down with the sheriff. If I disagree with something, or Superior Court clerk, we talk about it, and it's worked out. I can say no, and most times it's accepted. Sometimes it is appealed up to the chairman, but we work through it. It's not a fight, but it's all because of building that relationship and working together. You have no choice but to do that. You also have federal and state mandates. A lot of them are influenced by your operation. And this is an opportunity for you to build special relations, whether you go to Washington or in their local office or with your legislators. Don't wait till you're in a time of need or anything else to work on those relationships. And you, just because you're a commissioner, don't mean you're going to have a relationship as well as another fellow commissioner or someone else. I would encourage you to use the individual with the strongest working relationship if you got an issue of importance. And you can invite them to a lot of your special events, dinners and things, along with your commissioners, others. It's well worth. I remember one time we were in a contentious situation with a state legislature, and he told one of my commissioners, "We created you and we can uncreate you." That was pretty uncomfortable. I don't know whether he meant that, but we got the message that he probably would propose some type of legislation to affect how we would operate. But make sure you build your relationship with those elected officials. And certainly, many of you I do know probably take trips to Washington and go on Capitol Hill and talk about things of importance. You probably did it more when there was earmarks. You probably don't have the enthusiasm to go as much as you used to, but I think it's still important to know what's going on and what you've got there. You have other groups that we have relationships with. Let me go back. The Cobb Institute is another partner with ACCG, and I'm sure that'll be talked about more. Tremendous resources. It's another one of those partnerships and tools that ACCG offer. They do a lot of teaching and other things. Many of you will have direct contracts with Cobb Institute. We in Cobb have a contract with Cobb for a lot of our management training, and it's been continuous, no break since 1985. They do a lot of our supervisor development, a key managerial type training, and we've been doing that each year since 1985. You will have a lot of vendors you deal with. You will have other partners that you have as consultants. I would ask you to do your due diligence. Be careful with ethics and others as you deal with your vendors as you go into doing that business as well. But ACCG, as I talked about earlier, and their partnerships, even though every county is a member of ACCG, every county is also a partner and a resource with ACCG in what they do. It was talked about last night at the dinner. Don't forget, ACCG is here to represent you, to assist you in doing what you're doing, and don't reinvent the wheel, because they are that resource that will make your job a lot easier as you go through life and go from there. With that, I'll take some questions if you have any questions. If not, I'll start speaking again. Yes, sir.
Greg Fritsch, first, thanks for breakfast this morning. I enjoyed talking with you there. Second of all, essential services. How do you define essential services, and where do you get that definition?
Essential services, and we came up with that term, and others use it. It's something that you think that's required, that your community desire, that you put into some of those, and it's up to you to define what's essential in your community. I think some of the things that solid waste and some of those things in handling garbage disposal, and those things can change. You just got to determine what is just absolutely essential beyond what's mandated. And I think that's going to have to be determined by each community. But I can tell you that when I looked around the state and when counties were making cuts, some of those desired service, the two agencies that were getting beat up on the most and cuts throughout the state were libraries and senior services. I remember in a lot of counties I looked at libraries where they were cutting hours or closing branches and things of that nature. Now, I would say in Cobb, I think libraries is essential to the environment there from economic development. I can't imagine a county like Cobb without libraries. Now, my commissioners probably didn't put it in that desired service. I probably want to put it in essential services. But it wasn't, the big thing is, let's not get confused between level of service and essential service. You can still provide a service, but you can define your level of service. Like we've got probably 15 libraries. Do I need that many? Can I move the radius out? Do I need 5 or 10? Or do I need 2? This is a driving society. So a lot of times when you look at service, you don't have to eliminate them. You can look at the level of service as well. Yes?
So the constitutional officers are not your employees. The constitutional officers, is it on, are not your employees, but you give them your budget, so their budget. So
Right.
let's say countywide you need to cut because times are tough, and you have a constitutional officer that gets your budget but ignores it. How do you handle that if they're not your employees?
The Board of Commissioners, only control you have is in their budget. The Board of Commissioners can cut their budget, and they can sue you too. So you just have a decision to make. But I can tell you, when you communicate with a constitutional officer and you're going to make a 5% cut or a 10% cut, most, if not all, elected officials will work with you on that as long as you're doing it across the board. Unless there's some other service, if you've got a jail operation, something there's nowhere they can cut, you may make a decision to cut certain parts of the budget and cut in that area. But that's where you have to sit down and just work through it. But that's the only control you have over constitutional officers through that budget. But you just have to work through it. And that is, and throughout this state in some of my reading, a lot of the issues with budget and others, and it's been with sheriffs because of their law enforcement to jail and providing other services. In many counties, it's one of the bigger budgets. And so that's where you're going to have some of the big impact. So I think, again, that's the key, is to communicate and work through that. That's where I say there's a big difference between a city and a county. A city don't have to do that. Yes.
Mr. Hankerson, being a new incoming county commissioner,
Here we go.
how do I deal with change? Because all of my county commissioners that are on board have been there for 5 and 6 terms and are still stuck in that old way of doing things. Now, how do I calmly, professionally bring my ideas to the table and try to pull them to join me in the 21st century? Thank you.
I really think that's an appropriate question for Ross King. You know, and I welcome any help on that I can get, but certainly you're at a disadvantage because how many commissioners you got? 4 or 5 of you? 5. So you're outnumbered 4-1. And then obviously the constituents keep putting them back and back and back. So somebody's pleased. Again, it means that you actually, given your situation, this is where retreats, where you set goals, you try to get the policy, sit down and work together to do that. And make sure you understand their position and they understand yours. And I think this is a way a lot of things can be worked out and looked at to try to effectuate that change. Because I think just because you differ, sometimes people tend to become a little stubborn and they won't change. So I think as you do retreats, if y'all don't do retreats, do planning sessions, set goals for budget so that you come together and make sure the public is aware of what you're doing and invite the public to those meetings. What's going to effectuate change in your community is going to have to come from the community with the leadership coming from wherever, because other than that, you can't do it. The community is going to have to do it, and a lot of it's going to have to be done through planning, open communication, town halls, and things of that nature. Yes, sir.
Mr. Hankerson, thank you this morning for taking the time and sharing your experience with us. I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I did note that you referred to commissioners as district commissioners, so you have district voting.
Yes.
We have at-large voting, and I would like you to share your opinion on district voting versus at-large voting, sir.
I will talk about district voting from my experience in district commissioners. And I've not had any experience with at-large voting. I do know some of the politics and some of the arguments. I'm not going to get into that, but I'm going to talk professionally about the district votings. In our county, I have 5 commissioners. The 4 district commissioners, they're district, and the entire county is divided into 4 districts. The chairman run at large. And so when you have those districts, they tend to focus on their districts and the need of that district. And so that way, in our county, every district is different. And some would describe it as having its own face, having its own needs. And when you are at large, or if you're half of the county, it is more difficult to get what you want in your district if you're voting at large as opposed to that way. And I think I like the districts. They stay focused. At one time, I kind of was divided into 2 districts, the west and the east. And then the county decided years and years ago to go to the district concept. And they advocate. But at the end of the day, as far as county business, you know very little difference whether they're at large, because it still requires a majority vote on every agenda item and everything else. So if you try to push things through that you can't get the votes to do, it doesn't give you any advantage other than focus and services in your district. And I like the district because of the service and what you're trying to do when the faces of the districts are entirely different. That's just the way I see it, Professor.
David.
Yes, sir.
Your opinion, if we were to remove the emergency services from the general fund and set them up with their own special tax area, to where instead of coming through the general fund, they're responsible then for their own amount of taxing that comes in.
Emergency services, districts. Okay. There are some counties, and I know Gwinnett's going through and going to have to make some changes. We've had fire and emergency services in a district for the last 30 years. But that's the only district I have. The only thing I say to you is, if you take your existing millage and you set it up in that district, that's fine. But you lose a lot of your flexibility in the general fund is how you redistribute shift funds based on needs and capital needs. Our fire tax district, as I stated earlier, we 55-45 in our split in our revenues. In our fire tax district, there's very little revenue other than taxes. 99% of the revenue for that fire tax district are taxes. 88% of that fund is personal services. So the rest of it's capital. The challenge I have with too many districts personally, that right now I have general fund, fire, and debt. If you have so many districts, you're going to end up having to vote on each one of them individually. In most counties, it's easier to raise the millage on public safety or emergency than it is on the general fund. So when you get in there, if you lose some of that flexibility, I think it becomes tougher and you have to make a lot of those decisions on that fund. If I was in one of those funds, whether it's police, whether it's fire, I would want my district. But as a manager, I prefer the least districts I can have to give a greater flexibility. You think about your great state of Georgia. Even with some of those special funds, they don't even want to take those funds and so dedicated. They want to keep it for the general fund. Why? Because it gives them greater flexibility to manage their funds in up and down times, just point blank. But I think you're going to see a lot of counties and cities in House Bill 489 and others try to drive a lot of the counties to a lot of districts. And Ms. Nash, you want to add anything? You're going to probably you've had 5 districts, you went away and then went back. It looked like you're going back to that.
We're definitely headed back to that with implementation in 2013 as a result of a settlement of dispute. Mayor Bleckinger from Auburn and I are going to be on a panel a little bit that will talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
But you've hit it in a nutshell. You've got a balance of demonstrating a dedication to a certain purpose of revenues versus flexibility. That's the bottom line balance.
Yeah, it is.
Mr. Manager, I got a quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
In a manager form of government, how do you view the role of the manager as it relates to the media?
As it relates to the media, it depends on your setup. My role is no different than any other county employee. I have a communication manager. and all our media communication go through that individual, we pretty well know what the subject of the media is, and then he tells us to call that media individual back. So we pretty well know. But if I did not have that communication manager, it'd be no different than if he or Channel 2 or Atlanta Journal calling me, that we would be, and I would be just as responsive or make sure we got the information to them. But I try to minimize how many people talking to media, and also to know the subject matter before we call them so we can be prepared. And if you can do that, it works better for you.
Good morning. I'm Bill Morris from Columbia County. We're right outside of Augusta.
Yes, sir.
Wonder where your stance is on this new legislation exempting manufacturing from sales tax, and the fact the local community could implement an excise tax to supplant the lost revenue on energy sales tax.
I think it's something that you need to look at. You probably, because you don't know what revenue you're going to lose if you don't. I think that's going to be an individual by individual county decision. So far, we as a county has opted to not impose that tax because we don't know how it's going to affect us in economic development when we're competing with other surrounding counties and others. So for economic reasons, we've opted not to do it. But I think it's something you need to look at, because you can always, if you don't know what kind of revenue that you're going to be losing if you don't, I would encourage you just to look at it. But and we don't know, but as big as my budget is, I probably have greater flexibility than most to be able to make those kind of decisions, and I don't want you to think otherwise. So a decision I make, you may not be able to make that decision. Thank you. I think my time is up.
It is. Thank you. Thank you.